I spent 40 years of my life diagnosing why massive structures fail. I was a forensic structural engineer, the guy the city of Seattle called when a suspension bridge started groaning in the wind, or a luxury high-rise foundation showed unexplained hairline fractures. My entire professional existence was built on a simple premise: looking past the expensive, polished exterior to find the rotting steel and compromised load-bearing walls hidden underneath. I knew how to spot a catastrophic collapse long before the first brick ever hit the ground. I just never thought to inspect the foundation of my own family. If I had, maybe I would have seen the warning signs before the phone rang at Muy Born AM on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was standing in the kitchen of my newly finished mountain retreat in the Cascades. It was a stunning A-frame cabin built from reclaimed timber, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over a misty, plunging valley. This place was the culmination of 4 decades of inhaling concrete dust, working 60-hour weeks, and saving every spare dime. I had closed on it exactly 9 days ago. I was 66 years old. My knees ached when it rained, and I was finally ready to exhale. Then, the shrill ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet. Nothing good ever comes through a phone speaker at 5 in the morning. I fumbled for the device on the granite counter, squinting at the harsh blue light of the screen. Caller ID flashed a name that made my chest immediately tighten: Derek. My son never called this early. In fact, my son rarely called at all unless the conversation was a prelude to his wallet opening and mine emptying. But as I swiped the screen to answer, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about my grandson, Leo. Derek, is everything okay? Is Leo hurt? Dad. Derek's voice was a ragged, breathless rasp. He sounded like a man who had just run 10 miles through the dark with a pack of wolves on his heels. Dad, you have to help me. I'm out of time. They're taking it all. I stood up straight, the engineering instincts kicking in. Assess the crisis. Isolate the damage. Who is taking what? Slow down, Derek. Talk to me. The bank, Dad. The bank is foreclosing on the house. The words tumbled out of him in a frantic, wet panic. Chloe and I. Things got tight. The economy, my commissions, we fell behind. I thought I could outrun it. I thought I could fix it quietly. But they're calling the loan. They gave us notice. We have until Friday, Dad. Friday, and then they locked the doors and put my son out on the street. I didn't know it yet, but every single syllable spilling out of his mouth was a meticulously calculated piece of theater. Right then, I was just a terrified father and a desperate grandfather. My mind immediately flashed to Leo, 10 years old, a quiet, brilliant kid who loved collecting rocks and drawing sprawling architectural blueprints, just like his granddad. The thought of Leo standing on a sidewalk with his belongings in a trash bag made my vision blur with panic. How far behind are you, Derek? I asked, my voice dropping to that calm, steady register I use during site emergencies. Give me the number. A heavy, deliberate pause on the other end of the line. 60,000. But Dad, that's not even the worst part. They won't take a check to catch up. They want the whole loan called in, because I broke the terms. The only way to stop the auction is to secure the debt with a new collateral anchor. A hard asset. You encumbered. The room seemed to tilt slightly. The rain lashed against the massive glass windows of my dream home, blurring the pine trees outside into dark, threatening shadows. Your cabin, Dad, Derek pleaded, his voice breaking into a sob. It's paid off. It's free and clear. I just need you to sign a temporary collateral assignment deed. Just for 90 days. It proves to the bank we have family backing, it stops the foreclosure, and then I refinance with a different lender and release your title. You don't lose a dime. I swear to God, you don't lose a thing. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to the bridge of my nose. What happened next changed my understanding of my own son forever. But in that fraction of a second, I was drowning in the guilt of our past. Derek's mother, my wife, Sarah, had died of ovarian cancer when he was just 14. I was thrust into single fatherhood while trying to keep my engineering firm afloat. I overcompensated for her absence with my checkbook. I paid Mutrum Bornmoy Kongdola for his out-of-state tuition at USC because he needed a change of scenery. I paid Sarmoy Kongdola for his lavish wedding in Napa Valley because his bride, Chloe, insisted on imported hydrangeas and a 5-course plated dinner. I handed over a Bornmoy Kongdola bridge loan for the down payment on their Seattle home 7 years ago alone. I hadn't seen a single penny of since. I was the eternal safety net. And now, the net was being asked to catch a falling anvil. Derek, putting my primary residence up as collateral for a defaulted mortgage that exposes me to total ruin if you can't refinance. Why didn't you come to me 6 months ago? I was ashamed, he cried out. Then, the psychological kill shot. Muffled, but unmistakable in the background, I heard a child's voice. Leo. Dad? Why is Mom crying? Are we going to lose my room? My stomach plummeted into my shoes. They were having this conversation right in front of the boy. The sheer, terrifying desperation of it broke whatever resistance I had left. Okay, I breathed out, leaning heavily against the counter. Okay, Derek, breathe. I'll help you. What do we need to do? Oh my God. Thank you. Dad, thank you. His relief was instantaneous, almost dizzying. Listen, I have a private broker, a guy named Vance. He knows exactly how to fast-track this to satisfy the bank. We're driving up to your cabin on Friday afternoon. Vance is coming with us. All the paperwork is drafted. You just sign the temporary assignment. Vance files it with the county, and Leo keeps his home. Friday at high. Home PM, Dad. Please tell me you'll be there. 4 days. I had 4 days to sign over the deed to the only major asset I had left to my name. I'll be here, I promised. He hung up, leaving me standing in the cold, echoing silence of the mountain morning. I made a pot of black coffee, my hands shaking so badly I spilled the grounds all over the pristine countertops. I sat at my rustic dining table, watching the sun struggle to rise over the overcast peaks, and tried to convince myself I had just done the right thing. Then, 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. A text message. It was from Chloe. My daughter-in-law had spoken directly to me perhaps 4 times in the last 3 years, usually to complain about the temperature of the food at Thanksgiving, or to ask if my work boots were going to scratch her imported Italian hardwood floors. She was a woman who lived for optics designer bags, curated social media feeds, and an air of perpetual superiority. The text read, Arthur, you are an absolute lifesaver. Derek told me everything. You are our hero. Can't wait to see your beautiful new cabin on Friday. XO. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Something cold and sharp coiled in the pit of my stomach. It was the tone. It was too bright, too bubbly. A woman who is 4 days away from being evicted, whose child is allegedly crying in the hallway about losing his bedroom, does not send an exclamation point-riddled text about being a hero and touring a beautiful new cabin. 40 years of forensic engineering had programmed my brain to reject inconsistencies. When the math doesn't add up, the structure is compromised. When the story doesn't match the emotional physics of the situation, someone is lying. I opened my laptop. If I had just swallowed my doubts and played the role of the obedient, ATM father, I would have been living out of my truck by Thanksgiving. But Derek and Chloe forgot one crucial detail about who they were dealing with. They forgot that my entire career was based on pulling public records, investigating property deeds, and digging through municipal archives to find the truth behind failing structures. I logged into the King County Public Property Portal. I typed in the address of their 4-bedroom home in the Seattle suburbs. If a bank was 4 days away from a foreclosure auction, there would be a public notice of default filed with the county clerk. It was legally required. The page loaded. I scanned the lines of data, my eyes tracking across the screen. Status. Active. Notices. None. Liens. None. There was no foreclosure. There was no default. The First National Bank of Washington hadn't filed a single grievance against their property in 7 years. I sat back in my chair, the chill in the room suddenly seeping straight into my bones. The foreclosure was a phantom, a ghost story designed to panic me into signing over my Sartrum, Hong, Dola mortgage-free mountain cabin. But why? If they weren't losing the house, what was the catastrophic emergency? I dug deeper, accessing a secondary database I used for skip tracing contractors. I ran Derek's name. I ran Chloe's name, and there it was, hiding in the shadows of an obscure civil docket filed just 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a bank coming after them, it was a civil judgment. Derek and Chloe had been sued for fraud by a private investor group regarding a failed, high-leverage business venture Chloe had spearheaded. The judgment was final, and the court had ordered immediate restitution. They didn't need my cabin to satisfy a bank. They were going to strip the equity out of my retirement dream to pay off their own criminal negligence, and they were using my grandson's tears as the ultimate leverage. I closed the laptop slowly. The panic that had been gripping my chest all morning evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, absolute calm. The kind of calm that settles over an engineer right before he authorizes the controlled demolition of a condemned building. My son and his wife were driving up on Friday. They thought they were walking into the home of a gullible, guilt-ridden old man. They thought they had the perfect plan to rob me blind. They had no idea they were walking straight into a blast zone. I sat in the silent cabin, the King County Public Property portal glowing on my laptop screen, feeling a profound and terrifying cold radiating from my core. The rain outside continued its relentless assault against the A-frame's massive windows, but the storm in my living room was far more destructive. For 40 years, I had made my living understanding the exact moment a structure reached its failure point. Steel bends before it snaps, concrete grounds before it shatters. There are always warning signs. I just hadn't wanted to see the warning signs in my own flesh and blood. The physics of a lie are fascinating. To maintain a massive deception, you need structural support. For years, the structural support holding up Derek and Chloe's fabricated lifestyle had been my own unresolved grief and fatherly guilt. I had willfully ignored the hairline fractures in their character, because looking closely would have meant admitting my son was not the man I had tried to raise. The signs had started early, long before this fake foreclosure. I remembered the day they bought that Seattle house 7 years ago. Derek had sat across from me at a diner, playing with his coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. He'd spun a story about a bureaucratic error holding up their escrow, begging for a Born Mui, Kong Do La Bridge Lan, just to get the keys. He swore he'd pay it back the moment his year-end commission hit. 2 months later, Chloe pulled into my driveway in a brand-new, dealer-plated Range Rover. When I asked Derek about the loan, he gave me a tight, embarrassed smile and said the economy was shifting, that Chloe needed a safe car for their future kids, that he just needed a little more time. I never brought it up again. I absorbed the loss. That was the precedent I set. I became the load-bearing pillar for their endless entitlement. But this, extorting my retirement home under the guise of my grandson's impending homelessness, this wasn't just entitlement, this was predatory. I needed to understand the exact shape of the monster I was fighting. If there was no foreclosure, what the hell was the Born Trum Hai Mui, Hong Do La fraud judgment I had just found buried in the civil court docket? I poured myself another cup of black coffee, my hands steady now, fueled by a terrifying, absolute clarity. I clicked the PDF link to download the full court ruling against my son. What I read over the next hour made my blood run like ice water. Chloe had started a boutique interior design and luxury staging firm called Opulent Staging a few years back. She pitched it to wealthy clients as a high-end service for multi-million-dollar listings. Derek, working as a real estate agent, had funneled his clients directly to her. But there was no luxury furniture. There was no staging. According to the court documents, Chloe had been taking massive, non-refundable deposits from clients and using the cash to fund their lavish lifestyle first-class trips to Tulum, designer wardrobes, country club dues. When clients demanded their money back, Derek used his real estate firm's escrow accounts to illegally float the refunds, robbing Peter to pay Paul in a desperate, spinning Ponzi scheme. It all came crashing down when a tech executive audited his property sale and realized Mutrum Num Mui Hong Do La was missing. They sued. Derek lost his real estate license, a fact he had conveniently hidden from me for 6 months. The judge had hammered them with a summary judgment for restitution. But there was a detail on page 42 of the ruling that changed everything. The plaintiffs had agreed to hold off on referring the case to the King County District Attorney for criminal wire fraud charges, provided Derek and Chloe paid the Born Trum Hai Mui, Hong Do La restitution in full. The deadline for that payment? This coming Monday at Kong p.m. Suddenly, the Friday afternoon visit made perfect, sickening sense. Derek didn't need a temporary collateral assignment to satisfy a bank. He and Chloe were bringing a predatory hard money lender, this Vance character, to slap an immediate, high-interest lien on my cabin. They were going to strip $500,000 of equity out of my home, take the cash, pay off their fraud judgment to avoid going to prison, and leave me holding the bag. By the time I realized the loan wasn't temporary, they would be clear of criminal charges, and the hard money lender would seize my property to satisfy the debt. I'd be evicted from my own home. They were going to sacrifice me to save themselves. I closed the laptop. The silence in the cabin felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of impending war. I had spent my life reinforcing foundations against earthquakes and hurricanes. I knew exactly how to make a structure impenetrable. I just needed the right legal materials to do it. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Marcus Thorne answered on the second ring. Marcus was a bulldog of a real estate attorney in downtown Seattle. We had worked together for decades. I evaluated the physical integrity of commercial buildings, and he evaluated the legal integrity of their titles. He was brilliant, ruthless, and charged $1,000 an hour. Arthur, Marcus's gravelly voice crackled through the speaker. Tell me you're not calling to say the foundation of that A-frame you bought is sinking. I told you to run a deep soil test before you closed. The cabin is rock solid, Marcus, I said, my voice eerily calm. But I need your help. I'm about to be the target of a high-speed equity stripping scam, and the perpetrators are driving up here on Friday. Who? Marcus asked, the casual banter instantly vanishing. My son. I spent the next 20 minutes walking Marcus through every detail. The numb Hung AM phone call, the fake foreclosure story, Leo's tears, the civil fraud judgment, the Monday deadline to avoid criminal charges. I laid it out with the precision of an engineering diagnostic report. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear Marcus breathing, the quiet clicking of his keyboard as he pulled up the King County dockets to verify what I was saying. Son of a bitch, Marcus finally muttered. Arthur, this is textbook fraudulent inducement. If they trick you into signing a deed of trust under false pretenses, it's a felony. We can call the King County Sheriff right now. We can have a cruiser waiting at your driveway on Friday. No, I said instantly. No police. If I call the cops, Derek denies it, says it was a misunderstanding, and they walk away to try this on some other desperate mark. Or worse, the DA files the wire fraud charges on Monday. Derek goes to prison, and my grandson ends up in the foster system because his mother is a co-conspirator. I need to protect Leo, and I need to permanently neutralize their ability to touch my assets. I want a legal brick wall, Marcus. Something they can't climb over, tunnel under, or blast through. You want to trap them, Marcus said softly, catching my drift. I want them to walk in here on Friday expecting to steal my life's work, and I want them to find out that it is mathematically and legally impossible. I want them to look me in the eye when they realize they have absolutely nothing. Marcus let out a low whistle. Okay. If you want a fortress, we build a fortress. We have 48 hours. Here is what we do. We execute an irrevocable spendthrift trust. You transfer the deed of the cabin out of your name and into the trust. Once it's in the trust, you technically do not own it anymore, the trust does. You are merely the beneficiary with a life estate right to occupy. You cannot legally use the property as collateral for a personal loan, even if you wanted to. They'll bring a notary, I noted. This Vance guy, he'll try to push it through anyway. Let him try, Marcus countered with a dark chuckle, because we're going to add a second layer of armor. Your property borders the Snoqualmie protected wetlands, right? Right. The rear acreage backs right up to the marsh. Perfect. We're filing a voluntary environmental conservation easement with the state, attaching it to your deed. It permanently restricts the commercial development, subdivision, or leveraging of the land. Any hard money lender who looks at that title will run screaming in the opposite direction. It makes the property utterly toxic as collateral for quick cash. And the beauty of it? I can have the trust documents drafted, notarized, and recorded with the county clerk by tomorrow afternoon. By the time Derek and his shady broker arrive on Friday, the trap will already be sprung. Do it, I said without hesitation. Draft it. I'll drive down to the county office tomorrow to sign. Arthur, are you sure you're ready for this? Marcus's tone softened, just a fraction. When you box a desperate animal into a corner, they don't just surrender. They bite. Your son is looking at prison time if he doesn't get this money. Friday is going to be ugly. I've spent my life standing inside buildings that were tearing themselves apart, I replied, staring out at the dark tree line. I know how to handle ugly. We hung up. The plan was in motion. I felt a strange sense of momentum, the kind of hyper-focus that takes over when a crisis breaches the point of no return. I spent the rest of Wednesday cleaning the cabin, organizing my architectural sketches, deliberately ignoring 3 text messages from Chloe about how excited she was to see my new home. But I didn't know the true depth of their depravity until Thursday evening. I was sitting by the wood stove, reviewing the digital copies of the trust documents Marcus had just finalized, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Chloe's cell phone number. I let it ring 3 times, steeling my nerves, preparing to play the role of the gullible, compliant father. I answered, injecting a note of anxious warmth into my voice. Chloe? Is everything okay? Is Friday still on track? Grandpa? The small, hesitant voice on the other end made me freeze. Leo? I sat up straight, the trust documents sliding off my lap onto the floor. Hey, buddy. Why are you calling from your mom's phone? Is everything all right? Mom's in the shower, Leo whispered, his voice trembling. I wanted to ask you something. About Friday. Of course, Leo. Ask me anything. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background of their house. When Leo finally spoke, his words hit me with the force of a wrecking ball, cracking the very foundation of my soul. "Grandpa, are you mad at me for crying on the phone on Tuesday?" My breath caught in my throat. "What? No, buddy, of course not. Why would I be mad at you?" "Because Mom yelled at me," Leo sniffled, his voice breaking. She said I had to act really, really sad so you'd want to save us." "I didn't want to fake cry, Grandpa. I'm sorry. I just really wanted to see the mountains." I squeezed my eyes shut, a hot, blinding rage flooding my veins. My chest physically ached. They hadn't just used his proximity to extort me. Chloe had actively directed a 10-year-old boy to manufacture trauma, to perform grief, just to manipulate my bank account. They were corrupting an innocent child to facilitate a felony. "Leo," I said, my voice vibrating with an intensity I struggled to suppress. "Listen to me very carefully. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Do you hear me? You are a good boy. And you are going to come see the mountains. I promise you that." "Really?" The relief in his voice was a fragile, beautiful thing. "Really? I promised. I'll see you tomorrow, buddy. Put the phone back where you found it." I ended the call and set the phone gently on the table. The grief was entirely gone now. There was no more sorrow for the son I thought I had, no more mourning for the family I wished existed. There was only the cold, unyielding reality of the structure standing in front of me, and the absolute necessity of tearing it down to save the one person inside it who mattered. Friday was coming, and I was going to make sure Derek and Chloe remembered it for the rest of their miserable lives. Friday morning broke crisp and clear over the Cascades. The brutal rainstorm from the previous 2 days had blown eastward, leaving behind a sky the color of bruised sapphire and the sharp, clean scent of wet pine. It was the kind of morning that usually made me feel profoundly grateful to be alive, a reminder of exactly why I had poured my life savings into this mountain sanctuary. But as I stood on the wraparound deck with a mug of black coffee, watching the fog burn off the valley floor, I felt nothing but a cold, mechanical anticipation. I was waiting for the King County Courier. More accurately, I was waiting for the ammunition I needed for the war coming to my dining room table at 2 o'clock. At Chin, Bamoy AM, a white delivery van crunched its way up my gravel drive. I signed for a thick, rigid envelope, carried it inside, and laid it on the granite kitchen island. Inside were the notarized, officially recorded documents from Marcus Thorne, the Irrevocable Spendthrift Trust, the Environmental Conservation Easement. They were beautiful in their legal brutality. My property was no longer mine to give away. It was an impenetrable fortress, permanently locked out of the commercial real estate market, shielded from any creditor, lender, or fraudulent relative who might try to sink their claws into its equity. I placed the documents inside a plain manila folder and set it exactly in the center of the rustic oak dining table. As I waited for the hours to tick by, my mind kept drifting back to Leo's trembling voice on the phone the night before. "Mom said I had to act really, really sad so you'd want to save us." The sheer, calculated cruelty of it made my jaw ache from clenching it. I had spent decades trying to figure out where I went wrong with Derek. As an engineer, I was conditioned to look for the origin point of a failure. When did the foundation of his character start to rot? Was it when Sarah died? Was it the guilt-driven lack of discipline I provided afterward? I remembered a night when Derek was 17. He had taken my truck without permission, gotten drunk at a quarry party, and backed it into a concrete retaining wall. When the police showed up at our house, Derek was shaking, terrified he was going to juvenile detention. I could have let the law teach him a lesson. Instead, I hired a brilliant attorney, paid for the property damage out of pocket, and shielded him from every single consequence of his actions. I didn't know it then, but I was writing the blueprint for his entire adult life. I taught him that no matter how recklessly he lived, no matter who he hurt, his father would always step in and absorb the impact. I built the monster that was currently driving up a mountain to devour my retirement, but the eternal safety net had finally unraveled. At exactly mote, 4:11 p.m., the sound of heavy tires on wet gravel pulled me from my thoughts. I expected Derek's Audi. Instead, a massive, custom black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows glided up my driveway, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of the rugged wilderness. The engine idled with a low, aggressive rumble before shutting off. The real danger wasn't just my son's desperation. It was the company he had been forced to keep to survive it. I watched through the floor-to-ceiling glass as the front driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, and instantly, my internal threat assessment alarms started blaring. He was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, but he didn't move like a banker. He moved with the heavy, calculated grace of a predator. He had a thick neck, slicked back dark hair, and eyes that scanned my property like a vulture assessing a dying animal. This was Vance, the private broker. Then, the back doors opened. Derek emerged first. He looked awful. His skin had a sickly, grayish pallor, and the dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. He was wearing a designer sweater, but it hung loosely on him, as if he had lost 10 pounds in the last week. He was sweating despite the mountain chill. Chloe stepped out a second later, and the contrast was nauseating. She looked immaculate. Perfect blowout, cashmere coat, holding a white bakery box tied with a satin ribbon. She looked like she was arriving for a pleasant weekend brunch in Aspen, not participating in a felony extortion plot to avoid prison time. I scanned the back seat of the Escalade as Derek closed the door. Empty. My chest tightened. Leo wasn't with them. I took a slow, deep breath, burying my fury under a layer of calm, professional detachment. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch to greet them. Arthur. Chloe called out, her voice dripping with artificial, syrupy warmth. She practically floated up the wooden steps, ignoring the tension radiating from her husband, and threw her free arm around my shoulder. Oh, it is so gorgeous up here. You have really outdone yourself. I brought croissants from that little French bakery you love in Belltown. Thank you, Chloe, I said, my voice deliberately flat. I looked over her shoulder at my son. Derek. Hey, Dad, Derek mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. He was staring at the wooden floorboards of the porch like they held the secrets of the universe. Vance ascended the steps last. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his dead, reptilian eyes. Nice piece of land you got here, Mr. Sterling. Prime real estate. I'm Vance. I handle private equity solutions for high net worth clients facing liquidity hurdles. A broker, I said neutrally. Something like that, Vance chuckled smoothly. Shall we head inside? I know you folks are anxious to get this little family emergency resolved, and I have a tea time back in Bellevue at 5. I stepped aside, gesturing them into the living room. As they walked past me, Chloe leaned in close, her perfume almost suffocating. Thank you again, Arthur, she whispered, her eyes wide with manufactured gratitude. Leo was practically jumping for joy this morning when we told him you were saving our house. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to shatter her perfect teeth right then and there. Mom told me I had to act really, really sad. Speaking of Leo, I said, closing the front door, trapping them inside the cabin with me. Where is he? I thought Derek said he was coming up for the weekend. Derek flinched visibly. Chloe didn't miss a beat. Oh, we thought it best to keep him shielded from the grown-up business today. He's at a sleepover with his friend Mason. He was so stressed out. Poor thing. We just wanted to let him be a kid. The lies flowed out of her with terrifying ease. She was a savant of deception. I nodded slowly, playing the part of the relieved, trusting grandfather. Good. That's good. Kids shouldn't carry the weight of adult problems. Exactly, Vance said loudly, clapping his hands together. He walked straight over to my dining table, dropping a thick leather briefcase onto the reclaimed oak. He didn't ask for permission to set up, he just claimed the space. Which is why we're going to make this fast and painless. You sign a few lines. I process the paperwork with my underwriters. The bank gets satisfied, and Derek and Chloe get to sleep in their own beds tonight. Everybody wins. We sat down. I took the seat at the head of the table, my hands resting lightly on either side of the manila folder I had placed there earlier. Derek sat to my left, his leg bouncing up and down with nervous energy, shaking the table. Chloe sat to my right, unpacking the croissants, and smiling like we were about to pour mimosas. Vance stood at the opposite end, popping the brass latches of his briefcase. So, Derek explained the mechanics of this to you, right? Vance asked, pulling out a thick stack of legal-sized paper with yellow "Sign Here" tabs sticking out of the margins. We are executing a temporary collateral assignment. Your cabin acts as a guarantor anchor for the defaulted mortgage. 90 days later, Derek refinances, the anchor lifts, and your title is scrubbed clean. That's what Derek told me, I said softly, my eyes fixed on the stack of paper. Great. I brought a portable notary stamp, Vance said, sliding a heavy gold pen across the table toward me. I just need your John Hancock on pages 3, 7, and the final addendum. He slid the stack of documents in front of me. I didn't reach for the pen. I just sat there in the heavy silence, listening to the rain begin to softly tap against the glass windows again. Dad, Derek whispered, his voice cracking. Please. The bank closes at 4. If Vance doesn't wire the documents by then, the auction proceeds on Monday. We lose everything. I thought I knew the depths of their desperation, but I hadn't read the actual document they brought into my house. As a forensic engineer, I always read the fine print. I ignored the yellow sticky tabs and flipped to the very first page of the legal packet. I scanned the bold, capitalized header at the top of the document. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't a temporary collateral assignment. It wasn't a deed of trust. It was a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to immediately and permanently transfer all ownership and interest in a property to another party. There was no 90-day hold. There was no refinancing clause. If I signed that paper, I was legally giving the cabin and all of its equity directly to a shell LLC managed by Vance, effective the second his notary stamp hit the page. They weren't just going to leverage my home. They were going to outright steal it, evict me, and sell it for cash to pay off their fraud judgment. They thought I was so old, so panicked, and so stupid that I wouldn't even read the title of the document I was signing. I slowly lifted my head, letting my gaze drift from the quitclaim deed to Chloe's rigid, perfect smile, to Derek's sweating, terrified face, and finally, to Vance, who was staring at me with the impatient annoyance of a man used to bullying the weak. The silence stretched, pulling taut like a steel cable right before it snaps. "Is there a problem, Arthur?" Chloe asked, her voice faltering just a fraction of an inch. "It's standard boilerplate." I picked up the gold pen, feeling its heavy, expensive weight in my fingers. I spun it slowly, end over end. "Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "I have a question for you. And I suggest you think very, very carefully before you answer it." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "What is it, Dad?" I tapped the pen against the quitclaim deed. "If First National Bank is foreclosing on your home on Monday, why is First National Bank not listed anywhere on these documents? And more importantly, why does the King County Civil Court docket say you owe $420,000 in restitution for felony wire fraud?" The color vanished from Derek's face instantly. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the chest but hadn't felt the pain yet. Chloe gasped, a sharp, ugly sound, her perfect posture crumbling. Before either of them could speak, I reached out and opened the manila folder sitting in front of me. The silence in the cabin was so absolute, you could hear the pine needles scraping against the roof in the wind. The air pressure in the room seemed to plummet, sucking the oxygen straight out of my son's lungs. Derek stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to form a single syllable. I didn't know it yet, but this exact moment, the precise second the illusion shattered, would be the one I remembered, with the most chilling clarity for the rest of my life. Chloe was the first to try and patch the breach. She was a professional grifter after all, and grifters don't fold until the handcuffs click. She let out a high, brittle laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Arthur, honestly, you've been reading too many internet conspiracy theories," she said, waving her hand dismissively. Her perfectly manicured fingers were trembling. "What court docket?" "We have a dispute with a contractor, that's all. It's a civil misunderstanding. The bank is the real issue here. You're just getting confused by the legal jargon." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When you hold all the structural leverage, a whisper is louder than a scream. "Chloe, I spent 40 years reading structural stress diagnostics and municipal zoning laws. I know the difference between a contractor dispute and a summary judgment for felony wire fraud," I said smoothly, my eyes locking onto hers until she blinked and looked away. "I know about opulent staging. I know about the missing escrow funds. I know about the tech executive who finally audited your books. But most importantly, I know the King County District Attorney is filing criminal charges on Monday at 5 o'clock if you don't pay back the $420,000 you stole." Derek slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. A low, pathetic whimper escaped his throat. "You didn't come here for a temporary collateral assignment," I continued, tapping the gold pen against the fraudulent quitclaim deed. "You came here to trick me into signing away my home to a hard money lender so you could liquidate my retirement to save your own skins. And you used my grandson's tears as the crowbar to pry the door open." I looked at Chloe, letting the absolute disgust I felt bleed into my voice. "You told him to fake cry on the phone. You coached a 10-year-old boy to manufacture trauma so you could rob his grandfather blind. Is there any line you won't cross for $1, Chloe?" Her mask finally dissolved. The bubbly, affectionate daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by something cold, cornered, and incredibly dangerous. The warmth drained from her face, leaving behind a hard, sneering mask of pure entitlement. "You owe us, Arthur," she spat, dropping the sweet voice entirely. The venom in her tone was startling. "You sit up here in your $500,000 ivory tower, playing the grieving widower, while your son drowns. You threw hundreds of thousands at Derek's education and wedding because it made you feel like a good dad. You bought him off. And now, when we actually need you to save our family from being destroyed, you want to play detective? Sign the damn paper. You have the rest of your life to rot in an apartment. We are in our prime." "That's enough," Vance barked, slamming his hand flat on the oak table. The loud smack made Derek jump. The friendly private broker act was gone. Vance unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaning over the table. His physical size meant to be an immediate intimidation tactic. I had dealt with corrupt union bosses in Chicago who tried the exact same posturing. It didn't work on me then, and it wasn't going to work on me now. "Listen to me, old man," Vance growled, pointing a thick, scarred finger at my face. "I don't care about your family drama. I don't care who cried on the phone. And I definitely don't care about your feelings. Here is the reality. Your son and his lovely wife came to my associates a month ago when the court froze their assets. They borrowed $50,000 in street cash just to keep the lights on and the lawyers paid while they set this up. They promised me a clean title to a $600,000 property." He grabbed the quitclaim deed and shoved it across the table until it hit my chest. "You are going to sign this," Vance said, his voice dropping to a gravelly threat. "Because if you don't, your son doesn't just go to prison on Monday. He goes to the hospital tonight. My people don't file dockets, Arthur. They break legs. So pick up the pen and be a good father." I looked at the quitclaim deed resting against my shirt. Then I looked at Derek. He was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, silently begging me to surrender everything I owned, to save him from the violent men he had climbed into bed with. I picked up the gold pen. Chloe let out a breathless sigh of relief. Derek's shoulders dropped. Vance smirked, adjusting his cuffs, assuming he had won. Instead of signing their fraudulent deed, I used the pen to flip open the manila folder I had placed on the table before they arrived. "I'd love to help you, Vance," I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy as I slid the first document across the table toward him. "But I'm afraid you wasted a trip up the mountain. I can't sign a quitclaim deed for this cabin. I don't own it anymore." Vance's smirk vanished. He snatched the paper off the table. What happened next was a masterclass in watching a predator realize he had walked into a steel trap. Vance's eyes darted across the page, reading the bold, legal headers. "This is an irrevocable spendthrift trust, filed and recorded with the King County Clerk as of Chin, Hong a.m. yesterday morning," I explained calmly, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "I transferred the deed out of my name entirely. The property is now owned by the trust. I am merely a beneficiary with a life estate right to occupy the premises until my death. Legally, I have absolutely no authority to sell, leverage, or assign this property to you or anyone else." "You son of a bitch," Vance breathed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He glared at Derek. "You told me this title was unencumbered." "It was," Derek cried out, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Dad, what did you do? You can't do this." "Oh, it gets better," I said, sliding the second document across the table. "Because I know that guys like you, Vance, have shady lawyers who might try to pierce a trust by arguing fraudulent conveyance. So, I added a secondary load-bearing wall." Vance slowly picked up the second document. The color continued to drain from his face as he read it. "That is an environmental conservation easement," I said, unable to hide the grim satisfaction in my voice. "It is permanently attached to the deed. In exchange for a tax deduction, I voluntarily signed away all commercial development, subdivision, and leverage rights to the state. The land cannot be used for any commercial purpose. It cannot be used as collateral for a hard money loan. Even if you somehow magically dissolve the trust, the property is commercially toxic. It is legally dead weight to a guy like you." The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. I had spent my career securing structures, and I had just made my cabin the most legally impenetrable piece of real estate in the Pacific Northwest. Vance didn't yell, he didn't scream. That's how I knew he was genuinely dangerous. He slowly, neatly stacked the quitclaim deed, shoved it back into his leather briefcase, and snapped the brass latches shut. The sharp click-clack echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. "Vance, wait," Chloe pleaded, standing up, her hands reaching out toward him. "Vance, please, we can find another way. We can get you the $50,000. Just give us a few more days." Vance turned his head slowly, looking at Chloe with a gaze so entirely devoid of humanity it made my own blood run cold. "There are no more days, Chloe," Vance said softly. He grabbed his briefcase by the handle. Then he turned to Derek, who was practically hyperventilating in his chair. "You lied to me. You brought me up a mountain for a dead title. You wasted my time, and you insulted my intelligence. My bosses are going to be extremely disappointed." "I didn't know," Derek sobbed, tears streaming down his face. A 38-year-old man reduced to a terrified child. "I swear to God, Vance, I didn't know he put it in a trust." "Doesn't matter," Vance replied coldly. He walked toward the front door, his hand resting on the brass knob. He didn't look back as he delivered his final verdict. "You have until Sunday night to wire the 50 grand you owe me. If the money isn't in the account by midnight, don't bother going to court on Monday, because you won't make it there." The heavy oak door opened and slammed shut. A moment later, the massive engine of the Escalade roared to life, tires spun on the wet gravel, and then the sound faded down the mountain, leaving behind a silence so profound, it felt like the aftermath of an explosion. My son and his wife were trapped. The civil court wanted $420,000 by Monday, or they were going to federal prison. The criminal underworld wanted $50,000 by Sunday night, or they were going to the morgue. And the one asset they thought would save them was permanently, irrevocably locked behind a legal wall I had built with my own 2 hands. Derek slid out of his chair and collapsed onto the hardwood floor, curling into a fetal position, his hands clutching his head as he sobbed uncontrollably. It was pathetic. It was heartbreaking. It was exactly what he deserved. But as I looked at Chloe, expecting to see her break down in panic alongside her husband, I saw something entirely different. She wasn't looking at Derek with pity or fear. She was looking at him with absolute, unadulterated disgust. And then she slowly turned her gaze to me. The panic was gone from her eyes. The mask of the desperate wife was gone. What replaced it was the cold, calculating stare of a woman who had realized her ship was sinking and had already decided who she was going to throw overboard to stay afloat. "You think you're so smart, Arthur," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, steady whisper. She stepped over her sobbing husband as if he were a piece of garbage on the sidewalk. "You think you won, but I didn't come up here today without an insurance policy." I narrowed my eyes. "Your plan collapsed, Chloe. It's over." "No," she smiled, reaching into her designer handbag. "Derek's plan collapsed. My plan is just getting started." She pulled out a sleek, black USB flash drive and placed it gently on the dining table, right where the quitclaim deed had been. "Do you know what's on this drive, Arthur?" she asked, her smile widening into something truly demonic. "Because what's on here is going to make you wish you had just signed over the cabin." I stared at the small, black plastic rectangle resting on the reclaimed oak table. It looked entirely innocuous, like something you'd buy at an office supply store for $10. But the way Chloe looked at it with the smug, terrifying confidence of a woman holding a live grenade with the pin pulled told me everything I needed to know. Derek was still on the floor, his face buried in his knees, whimpering like a beaten dog. He didn't even look up at his wife. He was completely broken by Vance's deadline, drowning in the reality that he was likely going to be killed over a $50,000 street debt. But Chloe wasn't broken. Chloe was adapting. "What is that?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. I kept my hands folded on my lap, refusing to reach for the drive. Rule number 1 of structural diagnostics: never touch an unexploded ordnance until you understand the firing mechanism. Chloe walked slowly around the table, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped right beside me, leaning her hip against the table. She smelled like expensive jasmine and cold malice. "You love your legacy, don't you, Arthur?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate purr. 40 years as Seattle's premier forensic structural engineer. A spotless record. City councils consult you. Universities use your case studies. You are the man who prevents catastrophes. She reached out and tapped the USB drive with a manicured fingernail. "But opulent staging was bleeding cash last year," she continued, her eyes locking onto mine, glittering with toxic delight. "We were desperate. Derek's real estate commissions had dried up, and my clients were demanding their deposits back. We needed a massive influx of capital fast. And as it turned out, Derek had a client who needed something very specific, a luxury developer named Rostova. He was building a 120-unit high-rise in Bellevue, the Horizon Tower. My heart physically skipped a beat. I knew the Horizon Tower. I had driven past the construction site. It was a massive, glass and steel monolith, built right on the edge of a notorious slope known for unstable, saturated soil. Rostova was hemorrhaging money because the city wouldn't approve his geotechnical foundation reports. Chloe smiled, watching the color drain from my face. The municipal engineers wanted deep soil shear testing. They wanted reinforced pilings driven into the bedrock. It was going to cost Rostova millions and delay the project by 6 months. He told Derek he would pay a $200,000 consulting bonus to anyone who could get a certified, licensed professional engineer to stamp the existing, cheaper foundation plans and bypass the city's red tape. The air in my lungs turned to ash. I slowly turned my head, looking down at my son. "Derek," I whispered, the words scraping against the back of my throat. "Derek, look at me." He wouldn't look up. He just shook his head, pressing his hands over his ears. "Tell him, Derek," Chloe barked, kicking her husband's leather shoe with the pointed toe of her heel. "Tell your perfect father what you did on Thanksgiving." I remembered Thanksgiving. They had come to my old house in Seattle. I had spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen cooking a turkey. Derek had excused himself to use the restroom upstairs. My home office was upstairs. My fireproof filing cabinet, where I kept my physical, steel-embossed professional engineer's seal, was upstairs. And my encrypted laptop, containing my digital PE signature software, was right there on the desk. "You stole my stamp." I breathed out, the absolute horror of the realization washing over me. "You stole my digital credentials." Derek finally looked up. His face was slick with tears, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a pathetic, desperate pleading. "I just copied the digital file to a flash drive, Dad. I didn't take the physical stamp. I dragged and dropped the signature file. The passwords were saved in your browser. I didn't think it would matter." Rostova said the building was fine. He said the city was just being overly cautious. I stood up so fast my heavy oak chair scraped violently backward, hitting the wall. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a surge of pure, uncontrollable physical violence toward my own son. I grabbed him by the collar of his expensive cashmere sweater and hauled him to his feet, slamming him back against the drywall. "You signed off on a foundation sitting on saturated slope soil." I roared, the calm, analytical engineer entirely replaced by a terrified, furious father. "You used my name, my license, to bypass safety regulations on a 120-unit occupied high-rise. If that soil shears, the building collapses. Hundreds of people could die. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I needed the money." Derek sobbed, his hands weakly grabbing at my wrists. "Chloe said we were going to lose the house. Rostova gave us 200 grand. We thought it was victimless." I shoved him away in disgust. He crumpled back to the floor, weeping. My hands were shaking violently. My entire career, my entire life's work of keeping people safe, had been weaponized by my own flesh and blood to fund their grotesque, fraudulent lifestyle. If the city discovered those blueprints were forged, my license would be stripped. I would face catastrophic civil liability, potentially criminal negligence charges, and my name would be permanently associated with a horrific structural hazard. I didn't know it yet, but the true depth of the betrayal wasn't what Derek had done. It was what Chloe was about to do. "It's a beautiful tragedy, really," Chloe said, completely unbothered by my outburst. She picked up the black USB drive, twirling it between her fingers. "This drive contains the metadata logs from Derek's computer. It proves he accessed the files, yes, but it also contains carefully doctored emails I created, making it look like you were a silent partner in opulent staging. If I mail this drive to the King County DA and the Municipal Engineering Board, you lose your pension, your savings, your reputation, and you die in a federal prison cell alongside your son." I forced myself to breathe. In. Out. Assess the structural load. Find the pivot point. "What do you want, Chloe?" I asked, my voice cold and hollow. "The cabin is in a trust. It's untouchable. I can't give it to you." "I don't want the cabin anymore," she sneered, her eyes locking onto mine with the cold, dead focus of a shark. "I know you have a liquid SEP IRA retirement account. You mentioned it to Derek a year ago. It has roughly $500,000 in it. I want $420,000 wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands by noon tomorrow." "You want me to drain my entire retirement savings to pay off your civil fraud judgment?" I asked. Chloe laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "Oh, Arthur, you really don't get it. I'm not paying off the judgment. I'm taking the money, and I'm leaving the country. I have a secondary passport. By the time the DA files the wire fraud charges on Monday, I will be sitting on a beach in St. Bart's." Derek's head snapped up. The weeping stopped instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending shock. Chloe. What? What are you saying? She finally looked down at him, her expression contorted into a mask of absolute revulsion. I'm saying you are dead weight, Derek. You are weak. You cried when Vance threatened you. You're going to go to prison on Monday, or Vance's people are going to put you in a wheelchair by Sunday night. I am not going down with you. I am taking Arthur's money, and I am starting over. But what about us? Derek stammered, scrambling to his knees, reaching out for her leg. What about the 50 grand we owe Vance? If you leave, they'll kill me, Chloe. She stepped back, easily avoiding his grasp. You should have thought of that before you botched the cabin deed, Derek. You brought us into this mess. You can face the consequences. I stood there, watching a marriage disintegrate into a crime scene. She was abandoning him to die to save herself, using my stolen legacy as the ransom. And Leo? I asked, the name tasting like copper in my mouth. Chloe paused, her hand resting on the strap of her designer purse. She looked at me, and for a split second, I searched her eyes for even a flicker of maternal instinct. There was nothing, just cold, calculating arithmetic. Consider Leo part of the purchase price, she said with a chilling shrug. Once the wire transfer clears my account tomorrow at noon, I will email you a digitally signed, notarized document surrendering my full physical and legal custody of him to you. You get to play the hero, Arthur. You save your precious grandson. You protect your spotless legacy. And I get my fresh start. Everyone gets what they want. She was selling her 10-year-old child for $420,000. My mind was reeling, processing the sheer magnitude of the evil standing in my living room. I looked at Derek. He was staring at his wife, his mouth open in a silent scream of absolute betrayal. The woman he had stolen for, lied for, and destroyed his father for was leaving him to the wolves without a second glance. Noon tomorrow, Arthur, Chloe said, dropping the USB drive back onto the table. Wire the money, or I send copies of the doctored emails and the Horizon Tower logs to the press, the DA, and the engineering board. Your legacy will be ashes by dinner time. Don't try to call the police. If I see a single cruiser, I hit send. She turned on her heel and walked out the front door, leaving it wide open behind her. A minute later, I heard the sound of an Uber, which she must have quietly ordered, while Vance was yelling, crunching down the gravel driveway, taking her away. I stood in the center of the room. The wind howled through the open doorway, bringing the freezing mountain air inside. Derek was still on the floor, staring blankly at the wall, a hollow, empty shell of a man who had just realized his entire life was a lie. I walked over to the table and picked up the black USB drive. It felt incredibly heavy, a digital tombstone for my career. She thought she had me checkmated. She thought I would quietly drain my accounts, surrender my life savings, and let her walk away to protect my reputation and secure Leo's safety. What happened next changed everything. Because as I stared at that flash drive, 40 years of forensic engineering took over. Chloe had built a brilliant blackmail scheme, but she wasn't an engineer. She didn't understand the fatal flaw in her own structure. I didn't know it yet, but Chloe had just handed me the exact tool I needed to destroy her completely, save Leo, and watch my son finally face the absolute bottom of the abyss. I closed my fist around the drive, walked over to the heavy oak door, and slammed it shut, sealing Derek inside with me. The trap was about to spring shut, and I was going to be the one to pull the lever. I stood in the center of the cabin, the heavy oak door sealed shut, listening to the agonizing sound of my son realizing his life was over. Derek was curled into a tight ball on the hardwood floor, his hands gripping his hair, hyperventilating. The polished, arrogant real estate agent who had strutted into my home an hour ago was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out, terrified child who had just been handed a death sentence by the mob and a divorce decree by the woman he had committed felonies to please. She left me, Derek choked out, the words muffled against his knees. She actually left me to die, Dad. She's going to take the money and leave me here for Vance. Part of me, the father who had spent 38 years shielding this boy from the consequences of his own actions, felt a phantom ache in my chest. A desperate urge to pull him up, dust him off, and tell him I would fix it. But I brutally suppressed it. The eternal safety net was gone. I was operating as an engineer now, and an engineer knows you cannot rebuild on a rotten foundation. You have to strip it down to the bedrock. Get off the floor, I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. Derek flinched, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. Dad, Vance's guys. They know where I live. They know what I drive. If I don't have 50 grand by Sunday night, I said, Get off the floor, I repeated, sharper this time. You want to survive the weekend? You are going to sit in that chair. You are going to shut your mouth, and you are going to watch exactly how a professional handles a catastrophic structural collapse. He scrambled up, his hands shaking so violently he could barely pull himself into the dining chair. I picked up the black USB drive Chloe had left on the table. She thought this tiny piece of plastic was her golden ticket to the Cayman Islands. She thought she had constructed the perfect blackmail snare. But blackmail is just a load-bearing structure. It relies entirely on a single point of failure, the victim's paralyzing fear of the secret being exposed. I didn't know it yet, but examining this drive was going to give me the exact coordinates to drop a nuclear bomb on Chloe's escape plan. I walked over to my unpacked moving boxes and pulled out my old, heavy Panasonic Toughbook. It was an air-gapped machine I used strictly for reviewing compromised site blueprints. It had no Wi-Fi card, no Bluetooth, no way of connecting to the internet. If Chloe had loaded the USB with a keystroke logger or ransomware, it would die harmlessly in the sandbox of this offline computer. I plugged the drive in and opened the files. Chloe was a master manipulator, but she was fundamentally arrogant. She had crafted dozens of fake emails, meticulously formatted to look like they came from my personal Gmail account, corresponding with opulent staging. She had even dragged and dropped the Horizon Tower server logs, showing my digital PE stamp being accessed on Thanksgiving Day. To a layperson, to a hungry district attorney, it looked like a smoking gun. It looked like Arthur Sterling had secretly masterminded his son's fraudulent empire. But as I opened the engineering annex she had attached to the emails, the fake messages where I supposedly instructed Derek on how to bypass the Horizon Tower soil regulations, I almost laughed out loud. She used Wikipedia, I murmured, staring at the screen. What? Derek whispered from the table, wiping his nose with the back of his trembling hand. Your brilliant, conniving wife, I said, turning the heavy laptop around so he could see the screen. She forged emails trying to sound like a licensed structural engineer, but she used the term tensile elasticity to describe the failure point of the Bellevue soil. Soil doesn't have tensile elasticity, Derek. It has shear strength. Any first-year civil engineering student would spot this as a forgery in 10 seconds. A municipal review board would laugh it out of the room. Derek stared at the screen, blinking uncomprehendingly. But the IP addresses. The logs. The logs prove my stamp was used from my home IP address on Thanksgiving, I interrupted, my voice hardening. But they don't prove I was sitting at the keyboard. You know what I do have? I have the GPS telemetry from my truck, proving I drove to the grocery store for 2 hours that afternoon to buy more wine. I have the receipts time-stamped to the exact minute the signature software was accessed. And I have a spotless 40-year career of rejecting unsafe foundations, whereas you have a suspended real estate license and a pending federal wire fraud case. I slammed the laptop shut. If she sends this to the DA, it might cause a 3-week headache for my attorney. But it will guarantee her a 20-year sentence in federal lockup for extortion and forgery. Derek's shoulders sagged, a frantic spark of hope igniting in his eyes. So, we don't pay her? We just call her bluff? No, I said, leaning over the table, bringing my face inches from his. Because if we just call her bluff, the Horizon Tower gets built on unstable soil, and 300 innocent people move into a death trap. I am not letting my name stay attached to a compromised building for a single second, not even to play games with your wife. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. It was time to remove the load-bearing pillar of Chloe's blackmail scheme entirely. You cannot be blackmailed with a secret if you broadcast the secret yourself. I scrolled through my contacts and hit dial. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Sterling, tell me you're calling to say you're coming out of retirement. The city zoning board is a mess without you. David, I said, speaking to David Corcoran, the chief building official for the city of Bellevue. We had known each other for 20 years. I need you to pull the permit file for the Horizon Tower development. Developer named Rostova. Horizon? David asked, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing on the line. Yeah, I've got it. Approved late last year. You stamped the deep soil waivers, Arthur. Surprised me, honestly, given the slope grading. But if you say it's safe, my guys rubber stamp it. It's not safe, David, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. My digital PE seal was stolen and applied to those blueprints without my authorization. The foundation is sitting on saturated, compromised soil. I have reason to believe the developer paid a bribe to facilitate the forgery. You need to issue an immediate stop work order and red tag the site. Evacuate the construction crews. The silence on the line was absolute. When David finally spoke, his voice was deadly serious. "Arthur, do you know the magnitude of what you're saying? Rostova is going to sue the city. The DA is going to open a criminal probe. You're going to be investigated. I have the digital logs and physical alibis to prove the theft," I replied smoothly. "But my priority is the structural integrity of that site. Red tag the building, David. Call the DA. I'll cooperate fully." I hung up the phone and set it on the table. Derek was staring at me as if I had just set myself on fire. You just turned yourself in? You just blew up Rostova's building? Dad, Rostova has connections. You just put a target on your own back." "I did my job," I corrected him coldly, "which is more than I can say for you. And more importantly, I just annihilated Chloe's leverage. Her blackmail material is completely worthless now. By tomorrow morning, it will be front-page news that the Horizon permits were forged." What happened next required a pivot so dark, it scared even me. I had dismantled the threat to my career and secured the safety of the public. Now, I had to secure the only thing that actually mattered, my 10-year-old grandson. Chloe had promised to email the custody surrender after I wired $420,000 to an offshore account. It was a classic grifter's pivot. Once the money was in the Caymans, she wouldn't send the paperwork. She would keep Leo as an insurance policy, a permanent piece of leverage to ensure Derek and I never testified against her. I needed to pry Leo from her claws before she realized her blackmail was dead. I picked up my phone again and opened my text messages to Chloe. I typed carefully, crafting the persona of a defeated, terrified old man. "You win, Chloe. I can't let my legacy burn, but I am not wiring $500,000 based on a promise. We do this in person, tomorrow at Muimot, Hong AM. Meet me at the Chase Bank branch on Bourne Avenue in downtown Seattle. Bring Leo. Bring the physically notarized custody surrender documents. We sit at the banker's desk. You hand me the papers and my grandson, and I authorize the wire transfer right in front of you." I hit send. We waited in agonizing silence. The rain outside picked up, lashing against the A-frame glass like angry static. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Smart boy, Arthur. See you at Muimot. Hung. Don't try anything stupid, or the DA gets an email from my phone before you can blink." She had taken the bait. She was blinded by the proximity of the payday. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. "All right," I said, looking down at my son. "Leo is secured. Tomorrow at 11, I take custody of him. And Chloe thinks she's walking out of that bank a millionaire." Derek swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. "And what about me, Dad? What about Vance? If I don't have 50 grand by Sunday?" I stepped closer to him, the reality of my next move settling over me like a heavy lead blanket. I had spent my life fixing things. I was about to deliberately orchestrate a collision. "Blackmail is a two-way street, Derek," I said quietly. "Chloe used Vance's deadline to terrify you into compliance. She used Vance as a weapon against us. It's only fair we return the favor." Derek's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Vance is currently sitting in Bellevue, furious that he wasted an afternoon, assuming he has to spend his Sunday hunting you down for $50,000 in street cash," I explained, the arithmetic of revenge perfectly balanced in my head. "But what do you think Vance would do if he knew that tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, the woman who dragged him into this mess is going to be sitting in a downtown Seattle bank, attempting to wire $420,000 to the Cayman Islands?" Derek's jaw went slack. The blood drained completely from his face as he realized exactly what I was proposing. You want to tip off Vance? Give me your phone," I demanded, holding out my hand. Derek hesitated, his hands shaking, but the sheer, commanding authority in my gaze broke whatever resistance he had left. He pulled his phone from his pocket, unlocked it, and placed it in my palm. I went to his recent calls list. I found the unsaved Seattle area code that he had been communicating with all week. The Predator. The Lounge Shark. I hit dial and put it on speakerphone, setting it on the reclaimed oak table between us. It rang 3 times. Then, the heavy, gravelly voice of the man who had threatened to put my son in a hospital answered. "You got a lot of nerve calling me from this number, Derek," Vance growled. "I told you, no more talk, Sunday night." "This isn't Derek," I said smoothly, staring directly into my son's terrified eyes as I spoke. "This is Arthur Sterling, the man whose house you just tried to steal." Silence on the other end. Then, a low, dangerous chuckle. "Mr. Sterling, to what do I owe the pleasure? You suddenly decide you want to dissolve that trust?" "No," I replied, my voice hard and sharp as cut glass. I'm calling to offer you something much better than a heavily restricted mountain cabin. I'm calling to offer you a return on your investment. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, is the architect of the fraud that dragged you into my living room today, and tomorrow morning she intends to flee the country with nearly $500,000 in stolen, liquidated funds. The amusement vanished from Vance's voice. Is that a fact? It's a fact, I confirmed. She cut Derek loose. She plans to leave him here to face your associates on Sunday, while she flies to St. Bart's with the cash. But she made a logistical error. She requires my presence to authorize the wire transfer. And you're telling me this? Why? Vance asked, his predatory instinct suddenly razor-sharp. Because she threatened my grandson, I said, the venom in my voice entirely genuine. Tomorrow at Muimot. Hong a.m. She will be at the Chase Bank on Bourne Avenue. I am going to walk in, take physical custody of my grandson, and secure his legal paperwork. Once I have the boy safely out of the building, I am going to cancel the wire transfer. I let the weight of the scenario settle in Vance's greedy, violent mind. Chloe is going to walk out of the front doors of that bank at approximately Muimot. Muilum a.m., I continued softly. She will be entirely alone. She will be panicked. And she will have access to the offshore routing numbers for opulent staging's hidden accounts. Accounts that hold significantly more than the $50,000 she owes you. A long, heavy silence stretched across the digital connection. When Vance finally spoke, the chilling smile in his voice was palpable. Mr. Sterling, Vance murmured, I misjudged you. You are a profoundly ruthless man. I'm an engineer, Vance, I replied coldly. I just know how to redirect a catastrophic impact away from the structures I care about. Muimot. Muilum a.m. Bourne Avenue. Don't be late. I ended the call. I looked down at Derek. He was staring at me with a mixture of absolute awe and sheer, unadulterated terror. He finally realized that the safety net hadn't just vanished. It had wrapped around his throat. Go get in my truck, I ordered my son. We're driving to Seattle. The drive down the mountain and into the rain-slicked concrete labyrinth of Seattle took 3 hours. It was the quietest 3 hours of my life. Derek sat in the passenger seat of my heavy-duty Ford, staring out the window at the passing pines, completely catatonic. The heater was blasting, but he couldn't stop shivering. I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted him to sit in the deafening silence of his own ruined life. In my profession, we call what I was doing a controlled demolition. When a high-rise is structurally compromised beyond repair, you don't just hit it with a wrecking ball. That causes chaotic, unpredictable collateral damage to the surrounding city blocks. Instead, you map out the core load-bearing columns. You plant precise, calculated explosive charges at the exact pivot points. Then, you detonate them in a specific sequence so the building folds in on itself, collapsing straight down into its own footprint. I was bringing the building down. Derek was the collapsing structure, and Chloe was the debris that was going to be hauled away. The only thing that mattered was pulling Leo out of the blast radius before I hit the detonator. I didn't know it yet, but the true test of my resolve wasn't going to be facing Chloe. It was going to be surviving the collateral damage I couldn't predict. We pulled into downtown Seattle just after 10:30 the next morning. The sky was the color of wet iron, a steady, miserable drizzle washing the streets. I parked the truck in a loading zone 2 blocks down from the Chase Bank on Bourne Avenue. Stay here, I told Derek, putting the truck in park and leaving the engine running. He didn't argue. He looked at the bank down the street with a hollow, terrified expression. He knew Vance was coming. He knew what was going to happen to his wife when she walked out of those glass doors. He was paralyzed by the monstrous reality of the trap we had set. I popped the glove compartment, retrieved a thick manila envelope I had prepared months ago for a rainy day, and stepped out into the freezing rain. When I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors of the bank, the chaotic noise of the city vanished, replaced by the hushed, sterile hum of high finance. I scanned the lobby. Sitting on a plush leather sofa near the private wealth management desks was Chloe. She looked like she was waiting for a first-class flight to board. She wore a pristine trench coat, oversized designer sunglasses, hiding her eyes, her legs crossed elegantly. And sitting right next to her, clutching a small, faded blue backpack to his chest, was Leo, my chest seized. He looked so small, so devastatingly confused. He was swinging his legs, staring at the marble floor, completely unaware that his mother was treating him as a hostage to be bartered for $500,000. Arthur, Chloe said, a tight, victorious smile spreading across her face as I approached. She didn't stand up. She just patted the empty cushion next to her. Right on time. Did you bring your account authorization tokens? I brought what I need, I said, my voice dangerously flat. I didn't look at her. I looked at my grandson. Hey, buddy. You doing okay? Leo looked up, his eyes brightening instantly. Grandpa, Mom said we get to go stay at your cabin today. She said you're taking me up the mountain. The absolute, psychopathic ease with which Chloe lied to her own child made my stomach turn. She wasn't just abandoning him. She had sold him a fairy tale to keep him quiet during the transaction. That's right, Leo, I said, forcing a warm, reassuring smile onto my face despite the rage boiling in my veins. We're going to go look at the trees and watch the fog roll in. But first, your mom and I have to sign some boring adult paperwork. The banker is ready for us, Chloe interrupted, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. She stood up, smoothing her coat. Let's get this over with. I have a flight to catch. We walked under to a glass-walled cubicle. A young, sharply dressed banker named Evans gestured for us to sit. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that he was facilitating a ransom drop. To him, we were just a wealthy family transferring assets. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Evans smiled warmly, pulling up my profile on his dual monitors. I see you've requested a high-yield wire transfer. $420,000 from your SEP IRA, correct? That's correct, I said slowly. Excellent. I have the destination routing numbers Mrs. Sterling provided, Evans said, tapping his keyboard. Before we initiate the final security protocol, I understand there are some private legal documents you two needed to exchange. Chloe didn't waste a second. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, physically stamped legal packet. She slapped it onto the glass desk and slid it across to me. Signed, notarized, and filed electronically with the King County Family Court an hour ago, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a low, triumphant whisper meant only for me. Full, unconditional surrender of physical and legal custody of Leo. No visitation rights requested. He is officially yours, Arthur. Now, authorize the wire. What happened next was the single most vital inspection of my entire career. I didn't rush. I ignored the greedy, vibrating anticipation radiating from Chloe. I opened the packet and read every single line. I checked the notary seal. I verified the King County electronic filing watermark on the top right corner of the pages. I read the clauses regarding medical decisions, educational rights, and guardianship. It was ironclad. She had legally severed herself from her son with the cold precision of a surgeon amputating a limb. I folded the documents carefully, placed them inside my jacket pocket, and zipped it shut. I had secured the asset. The foundation was protected. I turned to Leo, who was sitting quietly in the corner chair, swinging his legs. Leo, I need you to do a very important job for me, I said gently, handing him the spare key fob to my truck. I parked my big black truck right down the street, right outside the coffee shop. Do you remember what it looks like? Yeah, the one with the loud engine. Leo nodded, taking the keys. Exactly. Your dad is waiting inside it. I want you to walk out the front doors, go straight to the truck, get in the back seat, and put your seatbelt on. I will be right behind you in 2 minutes. Leo looked at Chloe, seeking permission. Chloe didn't even turn her head to look at the child she had carried for 9 months. She kept her eyes locked entirely on the banker's computer screen. Go to your grandfather's truck, Leo, she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Leo's lower lip trembled slightly, sensing the unnatural coldness of the moment, but he slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked out of the glass cubicle. I watched him push through the revolving doors and disappear down the rainy sidewalk toward safety. He's gone, Chloe snapped impatiently, tapping her fingernails aggressively against the glass desk. The paperwork is in your pocket. Give Evans the authorization code, Arthur. Now, Evans looked at me, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Just need your verbal confirmation and your PIN, Mr. Sterling, and the funds will clear to the offshore account in 10 minutes. I sat back in my plush leather chair. I looked at the digital clock on Evans's desk. Muy mot, muy ba am. I looked at Chloe. The smug, victorious arrogance on her face was a masterpiece of human vanity. She thought she had beaten the system. She thought she was a ghost. Evans, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady rumble that commanded absolute authority. Cancel the wire transfer. Evans blinked, confused. Sir? Cancel it? Cancel the transfer, freeze the SEP IRA, and lock my account profile entirely until further notice, I instructed smoothly. Chloe froze. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Arthur, what are you doing? I will send that USB drive to the district attorney right now. I swear to God, I will hit send. She reached frantically into her purse for her cell phone. Send it, I said, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the desk. Send it, Chloe. But you should probably know that I called David Corcoran, the Bellevue chief building official, yesterday afternoon. The Horizon Tower has already been red tagged. The site is evacuated. The DA already has my statement, my physical alibis, and the GPS telemetry proving Derek stole my digital stamp. Your blackmail material isn't a weapon anymore. It's just a signed confession of your own extortion. Her fingers stopped hovering over her phone screen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her leverage was gone. Her payday was gone. She had just legally surrendered her only remaining bargaining chip, her son, for absolutely nothing. You're bankrupt, Chloe, I whispered, watching her entire world crumble into dust. You have no money. You have no husband. You have no son. And the fraud charges drop on Monday. She stared at me, pure, unadulterated terror finally breaking through her designer mask. I tapped my watch. Muy mot, muy born AM. And Chloe? I added, my voice turning to ice. I didn't just cancel your wire transfer. I made a phone call last night to a man named Vance. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. She stopped breathing. I told him you cut Derek loose. I continued ruthlessly. I told him you were trying to flee the country with his money. I told him exactly what time you were walking out of the front doors of this bank, entirely alone. Muy mort. Muy la mam. He's waiting outside, Chloe, I said. And he is very, very disappointed in you. She let out a sound that wasn't quite human, a strangled, high-pitched gasp of absolute, primal panic. She scrambled out of the chair so fast she knocked it over backward. She didn't even look back. She sprinted across the marble lobby, her heels slipping on the polished floor, making a desperate, frantic dash for the side exit to avoid the front doors. But Chloe didn't know the layout of the Chase Bank building on Bourne Avenue. The side exit didn't lead to an alley. It led directly to the front curb parking zone. I stood up, thanking Evans for his time, and walked slowly toward the front of the bank. I stood behind the massive, floor-to-ceiling security windows, watching the rain pour down on the Seattle streets. Through the glass, I saw Chloe burst out of the side doors, looking frantically left and right for a taxi. She didn't find one. Instead, a massive, custom black Cadillac Escalade pulled sharply up to the curb, tires screeching against the wet asphalt, blocking her path entirely. The rear doors slid open. Two massive men in dark raincoats stepped out. Chloe tried to scream, tried to turn and run back toward the bank, but she wasn't fast enough. One of the men grabbed her by the lapels of her pristine trench coat, practically lifting her off the ground, and shoved her violently into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut. The Escalade accelerated back into the heavy Seattle traffic, vanishing into the gray mist like a ghost. I watched the street for a long moment, feeling the heavy, undeniable satisfaction of a perfectly executed demolition. The rotten structure was gone. The foundation was cleared. I zipped my jacket, feeling the weight of Leo's custody papers against my chest, and walked out into the rain toward my truck. The nightmare was finally over. I had saved my grandson. I had neutralized the threat. Now, all I had to do was figure out what to do with the broken, weeping son waiting for me in the passenger seat. But when I reached my truck and pulled open the heavy driver's side door, my heart stopped cold. Leo was sitting in the back seat, safely buckled in, playing a game on his iPad. But the passenger seat was empty. Derek was gone. And resting on the dashboard, right above the steering wheel, was a single, folded piece of paper with my name written on it in his frantic, shaking handwriting. I stood perfectly still in the freezing Seattle rain, the heavy driver's door of my truck wide open. The city noise, the hiss of tires on wet pavement, the distant wail of a siren faded into a dull, underwater hum. My eyes were locked entirely on that single, folded piece of notebook paper resting on the dashboard. In the back seat, Leo tapped away on his iPad, entirely consumed by his game, blissfully unaware that the structural pillars of his universe had just been fundamentally, permanently altered. I thought I knew exactly how this day was going to end. I thought I had accounted for every variable, calculated every stress point, and executed the perfect controlled demolition. But as my trembling, rain-slicked fingers reached out and grabbed that piece of paper, I realized I had underestimated the one variable I should have known better. The unpredictable nature of a man who has finally hit rock bottom. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, the ink slightly smeared by a rogue raindrop. "Dad," the note began. I watched her walk out. I watched the Escalade pull up. I saw what Vance's men did to her. And for the first time in my pathetic, cowardly life, I realized exactly what I am. I'm a passenger. I've always been a passenger. I let you buy my way out of trouble when I was a kid. I let Chloe dictate my morals when I got married. I let Vance intimidate me into turning against my own father. I built my entire life on a foundation of shifting sand, expecting you to pour the concrete every time it started to slip. I swallowed hard, a painful, heavy lump forming in my throat. I leaned against the steering wheel, shielding the paper from the rain as I kept reading. "You were right today, Dad, about everything. Chloe was going to leave me to die, and the terrifying truth is, I probably deserved it. But Leo doesn't. Leo deserves the man you are, not the man I became. I'm not running from Vance. I know he won't stop hunting me for that 50 grand. And I'm not running from the King County District Attorney. Because I finally figured out how to stop the collapse. I'm walking down the block to the FBI field office at Spring Street. I'm turning myself in. For the wire fraud. For the opulent staging Ponzi scheme. And for stealing your digital PE stamp. The air in my lungs rushed out in a ragged exhale. My son wasn't running away. He was running directly into the fire. But I didn't go empty-handed, the letter continued, the handwriting pressing harder into the paper, almost tearing it. While you were inside the bank, I reached into Chloe's designer bag in the back seat. I took her encrypted backup hard drive. The real one. The one with the offshore routing numbers, the original undoctored client emails, and the financial ledgers proving she masterminded the entire fraud. I'm handing it directly to a federal agent. I closed my eyes, the sheer, staggering weight of what Derek had done washing over me. He hadn't just surrendered. He had taken the nuclear launch keys right out of his wife's purse. Vance can't touch me in federal lockup, and Chloe can't buy her way out of a federal indictment with her offshore accounts frozen. I am taking the 20 years, Dad. I'm going to strip it all down to the bedrock, just like you always said. Tell Leo his dad went away to learn how to build things the right way. I love you. I lowered the letter. The rain battered my shoulders, soaking through my jacket, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a profound, devastating mixture of absolute heartbreak and a strange, fragile pride. My son had finally stopped waiting for the safety net. He had jumped, knowing he was going to hit the concrete, because it was the only way to make sure the monster he married couldn't hurt anyone else. I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket next to Leo's custody surrender documents, and climbed into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, sealing us in the warm, dry cabin of the truck. I looked in the rearview mirror. Leo looked up from his glowing screen, his big, innocent eyes meeting mine. "Where's Dad going?" he asked, his voice small and curious. "Your dad." I started, my voice cracking just a fraction before I cleared my throat and anchored myself. "Your dad had to go to a special kind of school, buddy. A place where you go to fix the biggest mistakes you've ever made. He's going to be there for a long time." Leo processed this, his brow furrowing slightly. "Is he going to be okay?" "Yeah," I said softly, putting the truck into drive and pulling away from the curb, leaving the Chase Bank and the ghosts of my family's past in the rearview mirror. "For the first time in his life, Leo, I think your dad is going to be just fine." The news cycle over the next 3 weeks was a spectacular, violent storm. It dominated the Seattle front pages, completely validating every single calculation I had made. It started with the Horizon Tower. David Corcoran, true to his word, red-tagged the massive Bellevue construction site the very next morning. The city launched a massive probe, uncovering the fact that Rostova had bypassed a dozen safety regulations. The developer was indicted for bribery and criminal negligence. The tower was condemned, slated to be dismantled piece by piece before it could slide down the saturated slope and kill hundreds. My name was entirely cleared, my digital alibis and prompt reporting positioning me as the whistleblower who stopped a catastrophe. But the real justice wasn't in the municipal zoning board. It was in the federal courthouse. Derek's surrender triggered an absolute avalanche. By handing the FBI the unencrypted ledgers from Chloe's bag, he didn't just expose opulent staging. He exposed the money laundering network Vance was using to wash his illicit loans. Vance's people dumped Chloe outside a Seattle ER 48 hours after they abducted her. She was battered, bruised, and completely terrified. having been interrogated by violent men looking for the $50,000 she no longer had access to. But her nightmare was just beginning. The moment she was discharged from the hospital, federal agents slapped her in handcuffs right there in the lobby. She tried to play the victim. She tried to blame it all on Derek. She even tried to argue that I was the mastermind. But the FBI had the ledgers. They had the offshore routing numbers in her name. And they had her legally notarized document abandoning her 10-year-old child to facilitate her escape. The judge didn't offer her bail. She was remanded to federal custody as a profound flight risk. She is currently facing 25 years in a federal penitentiary, her designer wardrobe replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her entire empire reduced to a cold steel cell. Vance was arrested a week later in a coordinated RICO sweep, brought down by the very burner phone numbers Derek had provided to the feds during his confession. The predator who thought he owned the city was caged, permanently neutralized. The dust finally settled. The structure had completely collapsed. The debris was swept away. 6 months later, the Pacific Northwest transitioned into a stunning, golden autumn. The air in the Cascades was crisp, smelling of pine needles and wood smoke. I sat at the heavy reclaimed oak dining table in my A-frame cabin, a mug of black coffee steaming quietly beside me. The irrevocable trust and the conservation easement documents were safely locked in a fireproof safe downstairs. The property was a fortress, but it didn't feel like a bunker anymore. It felt like a home. Across the table from me, Leo was hunched over a massive piece of graphing paper, his tongue sticking out the corner of his mouth in deep concentration. He held a silver architectural compass, carefully dragging a perfect circle across the grid. "Grandpa, look," Leo said, holding up the paper. It was a crude but incredibly detailed blueprint of a treehouse. I calculated the load-bearing supports for the main branch, just like you showed me. Do you think the oak tree out back can hold it? I smiled, a genuine, deep-aching warmth spreading through my chest. I reached across the table and tapped the paper. It's a solid design, Leo. You accounted for the wind shear. The foundation is strong. Dad used to say math was boring, Leo said quietly, looking down at his pencil. I didn't shy away from it. I didn't coddle him. We had established a new rule in this house. Absolute, unflinching honesty. Your dad didn't understand that math is the only thing that keeps the roof from caving in, I replied gently. But he's learning. I had visited Derek at the SeaTac Federal Detention Center 3 days prior. We sat on opposite sides of a thick pane of reinforced plexiglass. He looked older, the gray creeping into his temples, but the sickly, terrified pallor was completely gone. He was sober. He was working in the prison library. And for the first time in my life, when I looked into my son's eyes, I didn't see a boy looking for a bailout. I saw a man taking his punishment. I'm doing the time, Dad, Derek had told me through the crackling prison phone. Tell Leo I read the book he sent me. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I'm rebuilding. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the cabin, looking out over the plunging, mist-covered valley below. The autumn sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long, golden shadows across the pines. I had spent 40 years diagnosing why massive structures fail. I knew that rot doesn't happen overnight. It happens millimeter by millimeter, a slow compromise of integrity, until a single storm brings the whole thing crashing down. You can't fix a rotten foundation with fresh paint and expensive wallpaper. You can't fix a broken family by writing checks and ignoring the fractures. Sometimes, true love isn't about catching people when they fall. Sometimes, true love is stepping out of the way, letting the building collapse, and handing them a shovel to dig themselves out of the rubble. I rested my hand on Leo's shoulder as he went back to drawing his blueprints. The storm was over. The wreckage was cleared. We had finally reached the bedrock, and for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to start building.